There are moments in life that you simply cannot explain to anyone who was not there. You can try. You can use all the right words, put them in the right order, and still fall short. What happened that afternoon at Windsor Castle was one of those moments, the kind that gets under your skin and stays there, not because of the gold or the ceremony or the cameras, but because of something far quieter. Something that passed between a father and his son in a room full of people and somehow still felt private. Margaret had worked as a protocol coordinator for the British royal household for 11 years. She had seen plenty of events, state dinners, investitures, garden parties, and the occasional private family gathering that outsiders would never read about in the papers. She was not the sort of woman who got emotional at ceremonies. She had trained herself out of that early on because her job required precision, not feeling. You could not afford to be moved when you were counting heads, checking timings, and making sure the right people stood in the right spots at the right moment. She prided herself on that kind of control. So when she tells people what happened the day King Charles presented the sovereign's ring to Prince William, she always pauses at a certain point in the story. Not for dramatic effect, but because even now, recounting it quietly over tea or in the back corner of a function room, she still has not entirely made sense of it herself. The day had started like most significant royal occasions, with a kind of organized tension that looked from the outside like calm. Margaret arrived at Windsor 3 hours before anything was scheduled to begin. And that was standard. She walked the route twice, checked the lighting in the principal room, confirmed the seating arrangements for the small group of household staff and senior aides who would witness what was, formally speaking, a private transfer of a historic object. The sovereign's ring, sometimes called the coronation ring, is one of the most significant pieces of royal regalia in existence. It had been placed on the hand of monarchs for centuries. The idea that it would pass from Charles to William, not at a coronation but in a quiet, deliberate act of preparation, was significant in a way that most people outside the room would only understand later. Margaret had been briefed on the symbolism. She understood the history. But understanding something intellectually is very different from standing in a room and watching it actually happen. William arrived before his father. That surprised her. She had expected Charles to be there first, seated, composed, the way he usually was before formal occasions. Instead, it was William who came through the door first, dressed simply, nodding briefly to the household staff. He looked, Margaret thought, like a man who had been thinking hard about something for a long time and had finally arrived at the place where that thinking would become real. He stood near the window for a few minutes. He did not look at his phone. He did not make small talk. He simply stood there, watching the grounds outside, and Margaret had the sense that he was trying to settle something inside himself. Then Charles came in, and the room shifted in that way it always does when a king enters. Not because anyone moved or spoke differently, but because something in the air changes. Charles was in a dark suit, no ceremonial dress, which somehow made the whole thing feel more serious, not less. He was carrying the ring in a small velvet case, which he held loosely in one hand, as though the weight of it was something he had already grown used to. He looked at William immediately, before he looked at anyone else. And William turned from the window. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Margaret has described this pause to people many times, and they always seem to expect her to say that it was awkward. It was not awkward. It was the opposite of awkward. See, it was the kind of silence that only exists between people who have known each other so long and so deeply that words have become optional. The room was absolutely still. Charles opened the velvet case. The ring sat inside it, gold and heavy with history, catching the light from the tall windows. He lifted it out slowly and held it for a moment, just looking at it. Then he looked at his son. What he said next was quiet enough that Margaret, standing near the side of the room, had to focus to hear it clearly. She has never repeated it word for word in any public setting, because she does not feel it belongs to her to share in full. But she has said this much. It was not the kind of thing you prepare. It was not the language of ceremony or protocol or official occasions. It was something a father says to a son when he knows that a chapter is ending and another is beginning, and he wants to make sure the person he loves most understands what that means. It was about duty, yes, but duty the way a person who has carried it for decades understands it, not as an abstract principle but as something that costs, something that takes, something that gives back in ways you do not expect and does not give back in ways you wish it would. He told William something about loneliness, about the particular kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being surrounded, and still feeling that the weight is yours alone to carry. He did not say it to frighten him. He said it so that William would know, when he felt it, that it was not a sign that something had gone wrong. It was simply the nature of the thing. And then he placed the ring in William's hand. Margaret said afterward that she had not realized she was holding her breath. She noticed it only when William looked down at the ring in his palm and then back up at his father, and she exhaled without meaning to. William did not put the ring on immediately. He held it for a moment, the way you hold something when you are trying to understand its actual weight rather than its estimated weight. Then he said something back to his father, also quietly, also not for the room, and Charles nodded once, not the formal nod of a king, the nod of a man who has just been understood. There was no applause. That is not the kind of room where people applaud. The household staff and aides who were present simply held the moment with the two of them, not in the way that people do when they understand they are witnessing something that matters. The ring was not kept on William's finger that day. That was not the purpose of the occasion. The purpose was the passing of it. The physical, intentional act of one generation placing something into the hands of the next. The ring went back into its case. Papers were signed. Brief words were exchanged with the small group of witnesses. Within 40 minutes, it was over. But Margaret did not feel like it was over. She went home that evening and sat in her kitchen for a long time, not doing anything in particular. Her husband asked if everything was all right. She said yes. She said it had just been a long day, which was true, technically. What she could not explain, what she has still never quite managed to explain, was why it had affected her the way it did. She had not been part of the conversation. She had not heard every word. She was there in a professional capacity, as she had been hundreds of times before. But something about the plainness of it had gotten through her professional armor in a way that more elaborate occasions never had. There had been no grand music, no vast crowds, no sweeping pageantry to manage the emotion for you. It was just two men, a father and a son, a ring and what it meant. She thought about her own father that night. He had died 6 years before, not long after she had taken the job with the household. He had been proud of her, she knew. He had said so. But in the particular understated way that people of his generation said things like that, once, directly, and then never again, because once was enough. She had carried that one moment of directness with her ever since. And sitting in her kitchen after Windsor, she understood something she had not quite understood before, that what she had witnessed that afternoon between Charles and William was not fundamentally different from what had passed between her and her own father all those years ago. The scale was different. The stakes were different. The history attached to that small gold ring was incomparable to anything in her own life. But the human thing underneath, the passing of something from one generation to the next, the trying to prepare someone you love for what is coming, the knowledge that you cannot fully prepare them no matter how much you love them. That was the same. That is what she means when she says the words stunned her. Not that they were shocking, not that they were inappropriate or unexpected, but that they were true in a way that cut through everything else in the room, through the formality, through the history, through the very considerable weight of what that ring represents, and landed somewhere private inside her that she had not expected to be reached that day. She still works for the household. She has attended many events since. She is still precise, still professional, still the kind of person who counts heads and checks timings and makes sure the right people stand in the right spots. But she says that afternoon changed something small in her. Something she cannot quite name but can feel when she thinks about it. A softening, maybe. A reminder that even inside the most formal, most historically burdened institutions in the world, the most powerful moments are still just human ones. A father, his son, and something gold passing between their hands. And words spoken quietly enough that the world could not hear them, but true enough that the room could feel them. That is what Margaret saw. And that, she says, is the part she will carry with her for the rest of her life.